Welcome back to the So There I Was podcast. I'm your host, Travis Womack. Today's special guest is former Apache pilot and current author, Don Bentley. Don is a New York Times bestseller and has written a whole bunch of the Tom Clancy series and has his new book coming out in September, the Vince Flynn Capture or Kill. So Don, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Travis.
So as we were just kind of briefly chatting there, you've got a pretty awesome career in my opinion. So let's just I let everybody just start with kind of what their career was and where did it start, when, and why.
Sure. So my wife's, appreciate you saying I have a pretty awesome career, because my wife says I can't figure out what I want to be when I grow up. And I think there's certainly a certain amount of truth to that.
We're all overgrown 12-year-olds.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's what the Army's looking for, right? Is that that guy or gal that never got over being 12 and still wants to blow things up. And so I knew from a pretty early age I wanted to serve. I'm the third generation in my family, the first one to do so voluntarily. So my dad was drafted for Vietnam and my grandfather for World War II. And now it's pretty neat. My son's about to graduate from A&M, and then he's going to be commissioned as a Marine Corps officer. So he'll be the fourth kind of in the line, as you might say. So I was lucky enough to get a Army ROTC scholarship to The Ohio State University, and went there, majored in electrical engineering, as all good writers do, and then went in the Army for 10 years after that, and got to be a Apache gunship pilot. And it is hard to have a bad day when you get to fly Apaches. There's this amazing little 30 millimeter cannon that hangs beneath the chin, and you can slave it to your eye. And so whatever you look at, the cannon looks at. And if you don't like it, you can just squeeze the trigger and it goes away. So it's a pretty good deal. At the same time, I'd always been writing as well. I always knew I wanted to tell stories. And even as a kid, I'm a kid of the 80s. And so they had these fantastic shows like the A-Team and Knight Rider.
Oh yeah.
Blue Thunder and Airwolf and all those good
things. I was gonna say, if you don't say Airwolf, you're not a real pilot.
Yeah, it has to be Airwolf. Stringfellow Hawk there playing his cello or whatever it is.
That music is so great.
It you don't realize how bad it was until you watch it as an adult. When my kids got into an 80s flick and they were watching the A-Team off of Netflix for a while, and then went to Airwolf, and I'm like, man, this is bad. He just stares off into the distance and thinks deep thoughts and plays his cello. But even when I was a kid, I'd watch an episode and think, what would be different if they would have done this, or if it would have ended that way. And so I think I tried to start writing my first book when I was in high school, and didn't finish it, and tried again in college. And then finally, right before I went to Afghanistan, when I was a troop commander, I finished my first book, and then worked on my second book actually while I was deployed to Afghanistan. Everybody else, we'd come home from flying missions and they'd go play Call of Duty or do whatever. And I would work on my book. And then after I got out of the Army, I went to corporate America for a little while and wasn't quite ready to sit in a cubicle. And so I went in the FBI and was a special agent team guy and ran sources for a while, and worked on my third book then. And then finally my fourth book sold in a 2-book deal, and it had taken 17 years and 3 books of not going anywhere before the fourth one sold. And then stuff started happening pretty quickly. And so I like to tell people, if you forget about the 17 years and the 3 books that nobody read, I'm pretty much an overnight success. So that's kind of my story.
It's just a matter of how long is the night.
Exactly.
So if it's Alaska, it's just one day, right?
That's right. That's right.
That's awesome. So when were you in Afghanistan? What years?
2005 to 2006.
All right. So we're the same time.
Yeah.
That's great.
Oh, yeah. Where were you?
I was in Logar province, predominantly on the east side. And we were out in the middle of nowhere, just our platoon. It was great. Is that little area where you have a GPS and you're like, Pakistan's over here. Let's stay on this side. Because no one actually acknowledges that line. So
so the bad thing about us is we were one of the first sets of helicopters to have like that Blue Force tracker, and so they
Oh
could
yeah.
watch you and then
Yeah.
rewind it later. And I probably got a little closer to
Yeah.
inspecting that border than I should have a couple of times, because it is, I mean, even with we didn't have moving maps at the time, so you kind of have these GPS steers that give you, general, or not general, exact locations, but you're also trying to figure out, is it this ridge line or that ridge line? Is
Yeah.
it this draw that you go up? And we were the first longbow helicopters into Afghanistan. And the reason why that's significant is the longbow version of the Apache was, I don't know, 4 or 5 thousand pounds heavier, but it had still the same engines as the much lighter Alpha
Yeah.
models. And so during the summertime, we were sucking wind, and on
Oh yeah.
more than one occasion, I'd be navigate or following a Chinook and not really paying attention and assuming he knows what he's doing. And he took me down this one-way box canyon that he could just kind of jump over. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And we're doing these big circles in the skies. I'm trying to get enough altitude. I'm like, there's got to be some Taliban dude just watching me go by with his shoulder fire missile. And he's like, this time, maybe the next time. And so
Third
it
time's a charm.
was, yeah. So summer times in Afghanistan was, I only got shot at a couple of times, and there was only one that was a real significant emotional event. But in the summertime in Afghanistan, I almost killed myself many, many more times.
Well, you're already at a
Um,
high altitude in some of that area.
yeah.
I mean, you're doubling down on weight and air and however all that works.
Yeah, it's kind of the three H's. If you're high, hot, and heavy, you got problems. And it's funny,
Yeah.
when I went through flight school back in '97, most of our instructors were old Vietnam guys who had gotten out and were now civilian instructors. And as any aviators do, they love to tell us stories about flying Hueys in Vietnam, and
Yeah.
and
There
they
are
were
no
so
rules.
underpowered. Yeah, that they'd have to choose between gas and bullets. And you're like, whatever, old man. And then, fast forward to there I was in Afghanistan, and I had to choose between gas or bullets, because you didn't even have enough power to hover. And so you would bounce along the ground and try and get to about 15 or 20 knots before you hit the HESCO barrier
Oh, God.
on the other side. And so there's something that's called a weight imbalance, where in the alpha models, you'd actually have this huge book, and you'd look up how much you weighed and the environmental conditions, and it were all these squiggly lines going everywhere. And you'd take a straight edge and try and figure out how much power you had. And so the longbow was nice enough to be able to compute that for you, but you'd also separate that into how much weight you could jettison. So on the stores where we only had rockets. We didn't use Hellfires in Afghanistan because it was the early model Hellfires, and they weren't super useful
Yeah.
against anti-personnel stuff. But you'd always do the calculation and say, how much weight could I jettison if I got in trouble? And so I think, I can't remember the equation. It might be like 500 pounds is 1 extra% of torque or something. And so if it was really sketchy, you'd have the front seater, the pilot, not flying. On the collective, there's a little jettison button, or he or
Yeah.
she would have their finger on that, getting ready to blow the store, so that if you got in trouble, you might just have enough power either to cushion the landing, or maybe just barely get past that cliff or rock or HESCO
Oh
barrier or
man.
whatever was taunting you. So not a whole lot of fun, but you
Oh,
get to
it's
be a really good pilot by the end.
I was going to say that you guys were out there. The amount of airtime, I don't know, hours or flight time
Yeah.
is insane. And my favorite thing was I was a airborne infantry, so we're on the ground,
Mm.
and I always thought it was funny the differences in how we communicate, because like we're like troops in contact, and all we know is MGLRS. So
Hmm.
y'all using latitude longitude. You're like, dang it, we have to do the freaking conversion while we're flying.
No, that might be the Air Force.
Yeah,
We only use grid coordinates,
yeah,
so we did the same thing. And in fact, it's every time a new special operations element would rotate into country, we take them across the river there at Bagram and practice shooting for them so they get good. And there are people like JTACs and stuff who their sole job is to be really, really good at calling in close air support. And when
yeah.
it's a fast mover and a jet and multi different kinds of
Oh
weapons,
yeah,
you probably need a J attack. But what we would always try and tell folks is like, just talk to us like we're normal people. Like,
yeah,
what I really need from you is, where are you and where are the bad guys, and really that's about it. And if you let me do the rest of it, we'll
Which
be in
direction?
good shape. But yeah, I mean, sometimes you'd have guys, like I said, I was actually, this only happens in the Army, but I was shooting for a Special Forces A team. And the guy on the radio kind of sounded familiar. And I was like, I don't know where I know that voice from. And after I did a gun run, he radio and he's like, Don, is that you? And it was a guy named Doug Peluso was the A-team leader, and he and I had gone to college together. And so
Oh,
now I'm
what
shooting
a small
rockets over his
world.
head in Afghanistan. Yeah. But
Small
I mean,
world
it
right there.
was it was like I said, with his guys, he had, and like all the teams, they might have a couple that are super proficient that want to give you a whole bunch of different instructions. But
Yeah.
most of the time, like I said, if you just keep it simple and talk to
Yeah.
us like normal people, we're pretty good at our job.
I had a really cool encounter in '06. I was in Iraq, and we had a Spectre opened up for us. It was awesome. And we had a lot of communication with them during that episode, or I could hear it at least on the radio. And it was 3 months later, we go to the chow hall at BIOP, and these 4 or 5 pilots were all there. They all had you can see the Spectre logo, and we're like,
Mm-hmm.
any chance of, like, holy crap, we're the guys on the ground. It's like the coolest encounter ever to, like, just have that moment of,
That is
y'all
cool.
do have faces. This is crazy. So,
What you also do a lot of times, you see the Air Force folks doing it, and we would too if we had a female pilot or a female crew member. Is when you guys are on the ground and stuff's happening, it's primarily male voices on the radio, and so if
oh
you
yeah,
can get a female voice that just cuts through all the
oh gosh.
traffic, and guys pay attention to that, and so you'd be like, "You talk to him, Jen," and then they'd answer her. So I'm like,
Well,
"All
there
right, you
was
do your thing."
so if you're there in Afghanistan 05, 06, oh, this is hilarious because we were so far out we couldn't even use, like, we had to use TACSAT for everything, and that was
Mm,
ran by at Bagram was the main channel for that, and it communicated with international forces as well, like the Aussies,
mhm,
and the Aussies had a female pilot, and
mm,
she would do her radio checks, every couple nights when she did her, I don't know
mhm.
what airframe she was on. But it was so funny you say that because our entire platoon's like, "Shut up! She's going to do a radio check. We gotta hear." It's
Yeah, you'd hear that too. Like sometimes if the I heard if one of like the one of the Air Force weather people was a woman who had a really good radio voice, and all of a sudden, everybody's asking for weather updates 8 times a flight. And I'm like, seriously,
yeah,
like there's
exactly.
nothing is I'm like, oh, you want to hear her talk over the radio
We
again.
would do
Okay.
that. Like, we'd have our entire battalion doing radio checks with the air. We're like, our commander, like, please stop. We're like, we haven't seen a female. I mean, we're a bunch of 20-year-old guys that are single. What do you expect?
Yeah.
This is great. So you got out in 2007,
2007. Yep.
and so let's just kind of jump the bridge from there. FBI, obviously, and let's just kind of fast forward over to the how in the world did you get to writing for the continuation of the Tom Clancy series?
Yeah, so I think writing is maybe like anything else, but it's equal parts hard work and then a little bit of luck, I think. And so even if you go back to Tom Clancy, there's a famous story where his first book, Hunt for the Red October, was actually published by the Naval Institute Press, which is a small press. It's just a little
Wow.
kind of niche press that publishes naval books and stuff. In fact, I don't know if they even normally published fiction, and so it was selling okay, but somehow somebody got a copy of the book to Ronald Reagan, and so he was walking past a bunch of reporters, and one of them said, "Hey, Mr. President, what are you reading?" And he said, "It's Hunt for the Red October." And so that moment. So
That's all it takes.
if yeah, and if Tom Clancy hadn't written a fantastic book, it would have never had that opportunity. And so potentially he would have, eventually sold more books maybe down the line. But his success in some part is due to luck, right? To that moment. And so the way it worked for me, and I apologize in advance, there are a lot of Toms in this story, but my editor is a guy named Tom Colgan, who was Tom Clancy's editor when Tom was still alive. And he's also edited everybody from like Lee Child to Janet Ivanovich and kind of everybody in between. And so he bought the first 2 books in my Matt Drake series. So Without Sanction and The Outside Man are the 2 books in my series. And so there's a saying in the publishing world that lots of people can write one book, but very few people can write 2 books. And so what they mean by that is you
Yeah.
have your entire life to write that first book. And when it comes time to write a second book, you're doing it under a deadline. You're doing it knowing potentially how well your first book did or didn't sell. You're doing it knowing that people are reading your books now and giving you maybe some not so great reviews. And so there's a whole lot more pressure writing that second book. And unfortunately, a lot of folks can't do that. And so when I turned in the second book in my series, The Outside Man, you have what's called an editorial call. And so it always, to me, feels a little bit like you're back in fourth grade and you forgot your homework and you're standing in front of the teacher, but it's really not that. What it's supposed to be is that your editor has finished your book, and then he or she kind of wants to talk through it with you and say, hey, here's some things I think you should look at. Here's some things you did well. Here's some things you need to tighten up your shot group a little bit. And so at the end of that call, I kind of breathed out this huge sigh of relief. And in a very like Columbo-esque moment, Tom Colgan said, just one more thing. Would you be interested in writing the Tom Clancy books too? And I heard this like, what did he just say? And so it
Everything goes
just,
numb.
everything goes numb. Your gut reaction is, no, why would I want to do that? And so, because I still had a full-time job. I was pretty certain that at least for that book, it wasn't, financially wouldn't have been in a place where I'd be able to full time. And so I'd still be juggling my full-time job as I'm trying to write now 2 different books. And so, it had just so happened that the guy who had written them before me, a guy named Mike Madden, who now
Hmm.
writes one of the Clive Cussler series, Mike's a great writer, decided he didn't want to write them anymore. And so they were looking for another guy or another person to write them. And so Tom knew that I could write more than one book because I'd turned in my second one and he liked it. And he thought that my writing style might mesh well with the Clancy ones. And so it did, and I got my first Clancy book is called Target Acquired, and my third and fourth last year was a little bit crazy. I actually had 3 books come out in that year, and so I had Forgotten War, which is the fourth
Yeah.
book in my Matt Drake series, and then I had Flashpoint and Weapons Grade, which were books 3 and 4 in my Clancy series. And so it was really fun. I'm not writing the Clancy books anymore. I couldn't
Yeah.
keep doing them while I was doing the Mitch Rapp ones, but they were really fun to write. And Tom Colgan is just such a fantastic editor because he's good. He's a really good editor as far as like seeing the book and seeing what the book could become. But he's also really good at handling writers, which is kind of like I think anybody creative, it's kind of like being the manager of the band,
Yeah. Oh,
right? Like
yeah.
how do you get the most out of the musicians, but still. And so he, when he brought me into the Clancy books, he said, I know you're really nervous about this, and he said, you shouldn't be. And here's why. And he said, my gift as an editor is to find the right writer for the right series. So he also does like the Jason Bourne series, the W.E.B.
Oh, real
Griffin series. Yeah, he
busy
does
man.
all of those for Putnam. Yeah. And so what he said to me is like, you are the right writer because I'm really good at that and I picked you. And so you don't have to lay it in bed at night wondering, are you the right guy? Can you do this or not? Because I'm telling you, you can do it. And that's why I picked you. And so he was really, really great guy to work with. And then some of the other writers, Mark Graney wrote with Tom Clancy when Tom was still alive and then was the first one to write in the series after Tom passed away. And so he kind of fielded more than one terrified text from me and kind of talked me down off ledges. And then Mark Cameron, who's a big burly ex U.S. Marshal manhunter guy, he was writing the other book because in the Clancy universe there are 2 books that come out each year, one written by 2 different authors, and so
Right.
Mark Cameron and I had to do quite a bit of coordinating stuff. But he was a fantastic guy too, and I think for all genres, but the thriller genre is just so supportive of new writers and of new folks coming in. And I had a ton of people rooting for me for sure.
Well, you mentioned that. You said something about what he said to you though about the
Mm,
encouragement part of it.
yeah.
I don't know, that just hit me of a way to communicate with people. I think people
Yeah,
forget that. Like you mentioned the creative part of it. Like there's, being in the military, we have a way of talking.
sure.
We can be kind of a little bit blunt and coarse at times, but there's an appropriate way to talk to someone,
Yeah,
and creative people have a reputation of like being sensitive,
yeah,
and
yeah,
and uh, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just you put a lot of work into it, and someone's like, I don't like this, and you're like,
yeah,
there's a better way to put it. Like, "Yeah, you're the right guy, you're the right person. I hired you. This is what you're supposed to do, you know. But and then
yeah.
you can give positive feedback in the appropriate way. That's actually a really cool point to take away from that. I Yeah, I think it's a fascinating story of just you mentioned the 17 years before, and that
Hmm.
really kind of how people would give up. I
Yeah.
mean, that's it's because I mentioned to you before we started, like, I'm in the middle of trying to write a book myself, and you're right because I have all the time in the world to sit here like today's a
Hmm.
good day to write, tomorrow's not, or I've got school with my
Yep.
kids, or it's a
Yep.
pizza party or Easter egg hunt party or something, and but yeah, what would you say to somebody, not me, just anybody else out there, wanting to tackle the process of writing just a book? What would be your main advice?
Yeah, so to be a writer, you have to do two things. You have to read a lot and you have to write a lot. And so I'll talk about the first one first. So if you're trying to write, especially commercial fiction, what you're attempting to do is make a product for a very specific audience. And so what I mean by that is you might have the same person who likes to read romance books and likes to read military thrillers, right? But when he or she buys a romance book, their expectations are going to be vastly different from when they buy a military thriller. And so if you as the writer, what I ask people all the time, and they say, hey, I want to write fantasy, or I want to write science fiction, or I want to write military thrillers or espionage thrillers. I say, okay, great. What are the two or three best-selling books in that genre right now that your book should be shelved next to? And if they can't answer that, that tells me right away they're not ready to be a writer
Yeah.
because they haven't read enough in their genre, right? It's the same thing as if you wanted to be a woodworker and you were going to build cabinets for people, you'd have to understand what kind of cabinets are people buying right now.
Oh yeah.
What kind of wood are they using? How many drawers? What's the fasteners? What color,
Oh yeah.
And so what you have to do as a writer is to do something that's the same but different. So Brad Taylor is another great friend of mine, who's been an amazing mentor. He was a special forces officer, and then he commanded at the troop and squadron level in Delta Force. So an amazing guy, incredible writer, New York Times bestselling writer. I am never going to write a better Brad Taylor book than Brad does. And so while my book should be shelved next to his, and somebody picks up a Brad book and then they pick up mine, if I try and copy him, it's going to be just that. And so what I have to do is figure out, what am I going to do that's the same as what Brad does so that our books belong together? But then what is the different choices I'm going to make so that mine won't be a knockoff Brad book? It'll be my book. And the only way you can do that is to read a lot in your genre. I get to be an adjunct professor at this MFA program in Pennsylvania. It's a little college called Seton Hill, not Seton Hall, Seton Hill. And so I do that all the time with my students when I'm talking to them. I'm like, okay, what book is this like? What are you trying to write like? And it can't answer that. I kind of send them back to the showers and say, listen, like your job, just like if you were selling shoes, you should know everything there is to know about the shoe market, in particular the type of shoes that you're selling. And as a writer, you can only get that by reading, and
Oh yeah.
reading a ton. And the second thing is writing, right? You only get better at writing by writing. And so it's the same kind of thing when folks say, yeah, I'll write once a week, or I'll write when the spirit moves me or something. I'm not a huge basketball fan, but somehow I started in my reels, I started getting like nothing but Kobe Bryant reels. And like when you listen to him talk about what he did to become a
Oh
better
yeah,
basketball player, and right, his work ethic, where he figured out if he got up at 4 in the morning, he would get, one more
that's a
workout a day
great
than
interview. I know
everybody
what you're
else,
talking about.
right?
Yeah,
And so writing's the same way. If you want to be a writer, you have to write every day or almost every day and do it consistently. Because the same thing, like you couldn't go practice free throws once a week and expect to be an NBA level player, right?
yeah.
Because the other thing you have to realize is in order for you to write commercial fiction, you're asking somebody to buy your writing, and you got to be really, really good creatively to have, you know, it's kind of the difference between, like, I have a guitar and I can play probably 4 chords. Nobody is ever going to get me and say, would you come and play guitar for us and sing the Eagles? Like, it's never going to happen
At our
because
wedding.
I'm not that gifted there,
Yeah.
right? And so writing is the same way. Like, if you're not willing to read a lot and write a lot, and one, you're working on a story. Stephen King's book on writing is kind of one of the classic ones that talks about the writing process. And he makes a point in that book to discuss how he views writing as a blue collar job. And so what he means by that is too many people attach this mysticism and creativity. And he's like, really, it's about putting your butt in the chair and writing every single day. But where the magic happens, and where I think writing is different than just a normal blue collar job, is that if you're writing every day or almost every day, then the story starts to live in your subconscious. And then
Yeah.
you'll be walking the dog or doing deadlifts at the gym or doing whatever, and you'll have that flash of insight on the story you're working on. But you only get that if you're working on the story enough that it lives in your subconscious. And so those are my two things. You got to read a lot and write a lot. And I don't think there's a shortcut for either of those.
I agree with you on that one. Now I have the new book I have to go get the on writing. that's
Now that
that's
his one, like, if you've never read that, it's phenomenal because the first half of it is autobiographical. And so he talks about growing up and learning to write and how that works. But the second half, he offers a lot of tips, but then there's another kind of writing science saying that says writing is rewriting. And so he shows some of his rough draft stuff and then the edits and things like that he makes. And that it can be really, really helpful. It's a phenomenal book.
that would be awesome to see because I've often wondered that, like, like it. I mean, good God, the
Hmm.
book is in small
Yeah.
font. It's a massive book,
Yeah.
or the what's one about the nuclear? My brain just stopped. But
Oh, the
um,
stand.
the stand, yeah,
Hmm.
it's like massive book, and like, how does someone process that in their head? So I
Yeah.
mean, this is thousands and thousands and thousands of words, and kind of like, how does it mold into the sentence was 8 words,
Hmm.
now the sentence is 20 words and all that. I think it's, for me, I'm a math person, so
Yeah.
my brain functions very systematically, and so I struggle with like that. Put a comma here.
Well, and I think part of it too that you have to separate in your head the difference between first drafts and second drafts and third drafts. And
Yeah,
so a first draft, you're just trying to get the story down on the page. And so you really shouldn't be worrying too much about, does a comma go here or not? Does this
right. Oh
language
yeah.
sound good? Because it's a different muscle. Like editing and making the book pretty and hang together is a different muscle than just getting that first draft down. And that's why most writers do a lot of cutting. So you're a math person. The formula that Stephen King gives is that second draft equals first draft minus 20%. And so the reason why you're taking out that 20% is because in the first draft, you're telling the story yourself. It doesn't exist yet. And it's kind of, he probably uses this illustration. But it's kind of like you're an archaeologist and you're uncovering bits of that skeleton as you're
Hmm.
writing the first draft, and it's not until that draft is complete that you can see
The whole
finally
picture.
that excavated, skeleton for the first time.
That's a great analogy. I like that. I think it's a what mistake do you hear? I'm sure people ask you for assistance all the time. What's some, aside
Yeah.
from not reading and not writing every day, what's the most common mistake you see?
So in order to get better at writing, you have to get feedback on your writing, right? Because if you knew how to do it yourself, you would have done it already. And so what can be really, really tricky is who you invite into see that writing and at what stage of the writing process. And so for me, even my wife is almost always 99% of the time she's the first reader. And so my kind of fiction isn't what she would normally choose to read on her own. And so I always figure like if I can get her interested in the story, then I'm doing a good job telling it. Um, but even with her, I don't ever talk about something I'm working on that's a work in progress, because for me, I write organically, or in writing, they usually, for fiction, they talk about plotters and pantsers. So you either plan out the book beforehand, or you write by the seat of your pants, or you write organically.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, and your mind is usually wired one of those two ways. So I have tried to plot books out, I've tried to outline them, and I just vapor lock. Like I can't. I have to tell myself the story as I'm writing it. And so because of that, it's almost,
Interesting.
I visualize the story as like this little, back in when I went through flight school, we had the little mini SEER school. We didn't even go to the full CRC thing. So it was like 5 days of running around in the woods and starting fires, and you're digging your little Dakota fire pit, and you got like 4 twigs and one match that you're trying to get that fire to light. And that to me is what the first draft is, that it's very, very fragile, that if you let too many other voices in, it's like that wind comes and blows the fire out. And so for me, I know not to let anybody else into that process until I've got a book complete. And then I had to figure out like who are the people who can give me feedback on the writing and story without me losing what makes it uniquely mine in the process. And so when my third book didn't sell, I went back and got a master's in fine arts and writing popular fiction at the school I get to teach at now. And it was a great experience, but I think for part of it, I lost my mojo a little bit, because I came in having written 3 books, being very confident about what I was doing, and then you're getting like sandblasted with criticism the entire 2.5
Mm-hmm.
years you're there, all well-meaning, all by people who are, it was their job to critique you.
Right.
But unless you're very, very sure of who you are and your voice and the kind of book that you write, you can lose yourself in that and lose what makes you unique. And so it's a little bit of catch-22, where if you change nothing, you'll never get better. But if you listen to what everybody tells you, you're going to not have a book that you wrote anymore. And so there's another great writer. His name is Greg Hurwitz. He does the Orphan X series and all kinds. He has this fantastic little short reel on his Facebook page where he talks about criticism and when to accept it and how to know whether it's the right one. And when I teach, I usually start my classes by showing that little clip, because he says stuff like, when you get that criticism and it's from a person who isn't trying to tear down your writing to build their own up, that has your best intentions, and you get that criticism, and you, in the back of your head, you're like, yeah, I was lazy there. Yeah,
Yeah.
that kind of resonates. Yeah, I understand that. But it takes a while, I think, to find those people, or to find the people that are the ones you trust and the ones that are good enough to be able to give you the feedback you need for your writing to get better.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to just get it's just the greatest thing I've ever read. You're like, just wrote it yesterday.
Yeah.
There's no
Yeah,
possible way this is right.
my old agent used to say that you should not get feedback on your writing from anybody who is related to you by blood or marriage, because they're gonna, right, they're gonna cushion the thing or tell you what. And that's why another great thing I tell people is, like, you don't have to go get your MFA. And in fact, if you're cash limited, I think dollar for dollar good writing conferences might be just as good or better. And so in my genre, there's a fantastic writers conference called Thriller Fest that's in New York every year. And the founders were like David Morrell, who wrote First Blood, Lee Child, who wrote the Reacher book, Steve Barry, Heather Graham. And so the people who teach are folks, if you're just starting out as a writer, that's where I met Brad Taylor and Mark Graney the first times, are people who are farther along on the writing path than you
Yeah.
are. And so they're doing what you want to do. And many of them volunteer and teach classes and stuff
That's
during those
awesome.
conferences. Yeah, it's
I
really
want I want
good.
to go just to sit around.
It's
Just to,
awesome. Like, you go, the best stuff happens. The classes are great, but the best stuff happens honestly at the cocktail hours
Oh yeah.
afterwards because you can
Oh
buy
yeah.
somebody a beer and, get a master's class in the business of writing or what to look for in an agent or, is your publicist doing their job? And those are the kind of things that are really pretty priceless.
That's it's funny people don't really probably put it in the same category, but like I used to go to basketball camp back in high school
Mm,
days, and I used to go to OU back when like they had Hollis Price and Eddie Nahara and these great team, and
hmm
you hear how hard these guys work, and they talked about how
Yep.
hard
Yep.
the NBA guys work, and it's, every now and then some old NBA guys would come back to I do 1,000 shots a day, and you're like,
Yeah.
1,000 shots a day, who's got time for that? Like it's what it
Yeah.
takes. You hear about the
Yep.
Kobe stuff. I mean, the
Yep.
guy basically created an extra day every single
Yep.
day. And
Yep.
it's like, there's a reason he's so good but
Yep.
you don't put, you typically don't think, oh, writing a book is in the same category. It's like, no, it really,
Yeah.
it, everything as a craft has the dedication of time that it takes to
Yeah.
do it and to do it right or do it
Yeah,
good.
and the competition and stuff gets exponentially
Oh yeah.
higher every time. Like when I was in high school, we had a really good basketball team, and then my junior year they went to state and lost. My senior year they went to state and won. And the captain, one of the captains of that team, went to go play for UC, and I remember reading an article about him, and he's like, there is an exponential difference in playing high school basketball, even for a phenomenal team that wins state and playing at the collegiate level, right? And then
Yeah.
there's another exponential
Oh yeah.
difference to go from there to the NBA. And it's the same thing for writing. Like if you want people to pay you for your art, you want people to buy your books and they be in bookstores, you have to be really, really good because there's so many people
Yeah.
trying for that slot, right? Same thing as the NBA or
Yeah.
the NFL or professional baseball.
Yeah. That's crazy because it's funny as you say that because I tried to walk onto OU's team back in '98, way back in the day, and I'm 6'4" at the time, and
Mm-hmm.
I've played center my whole life, and I get to OU, I'm the shortest guy on the court, and I was like, what just
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
remember the coach is like, you play point guard. I'm like, no, no, I don't dribble that well. This is crazy, and it's a very valid point. When I worked for the Mavericks years ago, like Steve Nash and I were the same size. We're both 6'4",
hmm
about 210. And I'm like, Steve Nash ran around and looks like a little midget, you know, compared to half those guys that are all 7 foot and Sean Bradley 7'6".
Yeah.
I was like, it's a whole different thing. And it's very true about how, you can still sell and people will
hmm
pay if you're a good high school team, like, the Allen Eagles where Kyler Murray went to high school, people pay a fortune to go watch him play. But,
hmm
and you can go to college teams, but if you really want to do it for a living,
Yeah.
it takes a lot of work. And I think it's a key thing for people to understand. People like myself who have an interest in writing, but not realizing what all it
Yeah.
takes, and getting past that first book's the hardest part.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but well, Donald, let's kind of wrap it up here a little bit. But I really appreciate you taking the time to
Yeah.
sit here and just kind of chat about your story, your career. I think it's regardless of what your wife says, I think it's pretty fascinating. I think all of our careers are. It's funny because some of them are hard to explain to
Yeah.
people. And I've learned that, since I retired last year, just trying to tell the story of what we've done. And
Yeah.
some of it sounds really, really weird. And so it's really encouraging just to, meet somebody who, we've probably talked on the radio and didn't even know it. Because we had a lot of Apache support when I was there. So
Yeah.
small world when it comes back around. But any closing comments or other than making sure people buy your book when it comes out in September?
No, if you want to know more about writing or about me or anything like that, the best place to find me is my website is donbentleybooks.com. Or if you're a social media guy or girl, I'm on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and it's the same handle for all of them. It's at Bentley Don B. So either one of those, I always love to hear from readers or people who want to be writers or current writers or any of that stuff.
Well, awesome. Great. Appreciate it. If you're new to the show, by all means, please subscribe and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.